Welcome back, and happy to say we're continuing to go through Hebrews and Hebrews chapter 8, where we're talking about Jesus' superior ministry, and the author of Hebrews is giving us three explanations, three reasons why Jesus' ministry is superior. Just a review, in verses 1 and 2, we talked about Jesus having a better sacrifice, and that better sacrifice is going to be elaborated on later in the book in chapters 9 and 10. And then in verses 3 through 5 of chapter 8, it talks about Jesus serves in a better sanctuary, and a second reason why he has a better ministry. And that better sanctuary is going to be elaborated on in chapter 9. And then here in verses 6 through 13, which is what we're looking at today, we'll find out that Jesus is the administrator of a better covenant. And because he has a better covenant, he's the better mediator of what God is doing. So that's what we'll look at. Let me just read through parts of this. I'm going to point out some things as I read through a couple of verses here and trust you to go back and read the rest of it. In verse 6, though, he says, "But now he, Jesus, has obtained a more excellent ministry, to the extent that he is the mediator of a better covenant, which has been enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been free of fault, no circumstances would have been sought for a second. For in finding fault with the people," he says, and then beginning here and going to the end of verse 12, he's quoting the new covenant promise from Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 33. And I'll explain these verses today as we go through this. So I'm not going to read them right now, but we'll go on to verse 13. It says, "When he says a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete, the first being the Mosaic covenant. But whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is about to disappear." So let's just look at this a little bit more closely here. This is an important section here. We're talking about Jesus being having a more excellent ministry to the extent that he has a better covenant. So this more excellent ministry in verse 6 reminds us of what the main point was from verse 1, wasn't it? He's making sure that our thinking, he being the Holy Spirit, is tracking with God. This is God's reasoning. This is God's way of thinking about the history of Israel. It says in verse 6, he's a mediator of a better covenant, one enacted on better promises. So the mediator in the Bible and in our own experience is like a go-between. Jesus himself being a mediator is a go-between. He goes between humanity and God. He brings them together. That's what Jesus is doing. The conditions of that going between, the conditions of that mediation are set forth in covenants. We have covenants throughout the Bible, and Jesus' covenant is better. Better than what? Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute here. Why is it better? Well, it's better because it says at the end of verse 6, it's enacted on better promises. Now, these covenants are really just collections of promises. So when we think about the Mosaic covenant, it was based on God's promise to bless Israel, but also Israel's response and promise to do all that God had promised, all that God commanded. So specifically, if we look at Exodus 19, 7 and 8, it says this. It says that, so Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. So he's talking about these Mosaic covenant. Then all the people answered together and said, "All the Lord has spoken, we will do." And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. So here's Israel making a promise in the Mosaic covenant. They're making a promise on their side that they're going to obey what God says. God promises them to to bless them if they obeyed. And this is really clearly seen in Deuteronomy, a reiteration of the law, where it says, "Now Israel listened to the statutes, and the judgments which I am teaching you to perform." So this is Moses calling to Israel's attention these promises that they've made, that God has told them to do, and his commands for them that they are to perform. Why is he reminding them? Well, Deuteronomy 4:1 goes on to say, "So that you will live and go in and take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you." So their ability to go into the land, to settle all the land that God had promised them, to reap the blessings from that land that God said that they would, was conditioned on them obeying the promises of the Mosaic law. Now, important to keep in mind here, God is not promising them that they'll be able to, that God is not addressing the fact that they already own the land. He's only addressing the fact that there's a condition for them to go in and hold on to it. They own the land, but in order for them to possess it, they need to obey God's word. So that's the mediator of the Mosaic covenant was Moses, and he was that go-between between God and Israel, between God and his people. We saw that in both of those verses. Verse 7 then, it talks about the first covenant. It says, "For if the first covenant had been free of fault, no circumstance would have been sought for a second." So the first covenant is the covenant with Moses. It's first in terms of chronology. It's the first covenant was temporary. That was the fault with it. It was a broken covenant, another fault with it. So God withheld his blessing. That's what the end of verse 9 means, that he withheld his blessing. So in verse 8, we see a new covenant is promised by God. And as I said, this quotes Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 33. A new covenant comes after the Mosaic covenant chronologically. And it's specifically at the beginning of verse 8, you can see that. It's with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So at this time of the Mosaic covenant, the houses of Israel and Judah were being dispersed or had been dispersed. And in this covenant then, it's with both of them, implying, of course, that they'll be reunited. Verse 10 talks about the time frame for the covenant. It says, "This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, declare the Lord." What are those days? Well, this is a phrase that refers to the days of the Messiah. After those days of Israel's dispersion, when they are being regathered in the land, when their chastening for disobedience by being dispersed is coming to an end. This chastening that's going to come to an end is being experienced by Israel today. They are not a godly nation. They are a secular nation. They are not an observant Jewish nation. They are very liberal. So they're continuing to be chastened by God even today. So what does that mean for us? It's not after those days yet, right? They're not being, they haven't been fully and finally regathered into the land. I think it's happening, but it's not yet done. It's not yet after those days. We go down to verses 10 to 12. We see all the promises of God in this covenant. Now notice that these are one-way promises. The Mosaic promise was by Israel that they would obey all God had said. And then God's promise to them was that if they would obey, they would receive his blessings. This covenant is better because it's better promises. These are promises that are made by God and not conditioned on anything Israel does. So let's just go through these promises in verses 10 through 12, get a sense of them. It says God will do all these promises for Israel. God is going to do it. The promises are to Israel from God, no conditions like the Mosaic covenant had. One promises the internalization of the law. Their minds and hearts will be a tablet, as it were, that God writes his laws on, that this will be internalized. Their conscience will be an infallible guide for them to pleasing God. They are going to have this mutual, unconditional, uninterrupted love between themselves and God. He's going to be their God, and they will be my people, God says. They'll have this universal knowledge of God. They will not teach, it says in verse 11, each one his fellow citizen and each one his brothers, saying, know the Lord, for they all will all know me, from the least to the greatest of them. So they'll have this new internal knowledge of God, and mercy and forgiveness will be extended to them when they sin. So, great promises that Israel has in the future, and they are in the process. The writer is making this point here, that they are in the process of being fulfilled. Look at verse 13. He says, when he said a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. But whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is about to disappear. So we have this twofold view here, side by side. Some would refer to this kind of as already, not yet. That what's already happened is we have a new covenant. The first is obsolete, so it's made obsolete by the second coming. Not yet, however, is that it's becoming obsolete. It's in the process, and it's growing old. It's about to disappear. So what he's telling the readers here is that they're on the cusp of the full realization of this new covenant. They're standing on the very edge of the end of the last days. And Jesus is in this process right now. In his ministry in heaven, he is in this process right now of bringing this new covenant with Israel into existence. That's about to happen. So let's just review this or meditate on it a little bit and think about what this means for us. Well, on the one hand, Jesus is not the priest administering the Mosaic covenant, but he is a priest administering the new covenant. He is that mediator between God and man based on this new covenant. The readers then are being told or encouraged to become out of the old covenant, to not go back to the temple, to not go and sacrifice animals, to not participate in the Day of Atonement. That's all preliminary. Jesus is the reality. So they're being called out of the old covenant and called to Jesus, called to have faith in him so that through him they might receive the coming benefits of the new covenant. And we'll see that, how they're to live in light of the new covenant starting in chapter 10, verse 19, where we start to see how this is applied to the people that are reading this book. For us, however, we are not Jews. We are not going to be kind of dual citizens in heaven, citizens of Israel and citizens of the church. We are citizens of the church only. What does this mean for us? It means, number one, that we are living at the end of the last days. Remember how this book started, that Jesus spoke to us. God had spoken to us through the prophets, but now he speaks to us in these last days through his Son. So we are living at the end of the last days. Jesus is in the process of bringing about all that God has promised, making that Mosaic covenant obsolete and bringing in the blessings of the new covenant. So we are invited to live in light of the fact that we are at the end of history, that we are about to witness the inauguration of a new covenant between God and Israel. We're going to see this, in my opinion. We are going to be witnesses to this. I'll talk later about whether or not the church actually participates in some way. There's a lot of different views. But for right now, within the context of what we're looking at, the main message to us is that we are at the end of the last days, and Jesus is in the process of bringing the complete obsolescence of the Mosaic covenant and replacing it, which is about to disappear, and replacing it fully with the new covenant that God has made with Israel. So brothers and sisters, I hope this brings clarity to you. Sometimes this is a confusing area, our relationship with the new covenant. So let's just take it a piece at a time, not to get ahead of ourselves, but to just try to understand what the writer of the Hebrews is saying to these Jewish brothers and sisters. God bless you.